The dog had been there for 3 nights straight, pacing the edge of the frozen creek like it was guarding something sacred. On the first day, Silas thought it was just another stray left behind by the mountain trappers. By the second, he figured it must have lost its master. But by the third, when the howling started just before dawn and carried on long after the sky brightened, he saddled his horse and rode out through the snow. The ranch sat quiet behind him. Nothing but silence and the low hum of cold air brushing through brittle grass. Silas hadn't heard a sound that persistent since the winter his daughter died. The memory dug deep in his ribs as he approached the animal. It didn't run, just turned its head, eyes wide and glassy, chest heaving, front paws coated in ice where it had scraped a hole into the bank. "You diggin' for bones?" he muttered, kneeling to study the ragged pit. The dog whined, tail low, then pawed again. Something flickered in Silas, a flicker he hadn't felt in years. He dropped to his knees and began to dig. The snow was packed and stubborn, but the dog kept pressing its nose in, guiding him to a patch where the white had turned faintly gray. Then he saw it, just a glimpse of brown cloth. Panic surged. He clawed faster, heart thudding, until his bare hands met something soft. A face, a girl's face, blue-lipped. Still, a braid stiff with frost curled against her cheek. For a second he thought she was gone. But then her eyelids fluttered. Silas yanked off his coat and wrapped her in it, lifting her gently, feeling the terrifying weightlessness of someone too cold, too far gone. The dog barked twice and trotted beside him as he stumbled back toward the horse, cradling the girl against his chest. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask where she'd come from. The only thing that mattered was she was breathing, and somewhere deep inside him, beneath years of silence and guilt, something else started breathing too. As the sun broke through the trees, the dog let out one last howl, not of warning or fear, but something softer. Almost like grief, almost like hope. Silas didn't know what to make of it yet. But he knew this. He couldn't walk away this time. Not again. Not when the dog had called him back to life. Silas laid the girl on the old cot near the stove, the one no one had slept in since Mary passed. He stoked the fire until the iron walls glowed red, then stripped off her frozen clothes with trembling hands, wrapping her in wool and prayer. The dog curled beside her instantly, pressing its body to hers like it had done this before, like it had kept her alive that way. Her skin was pale as candle wax, but the rise and fall of her chest told him the fight wasn't over. He sat on the edge of the table, watching the dog, puzzled. There was something about its eyes, deep amber, flecked with old sorrow, that stirred a memory too sharp to name. Silas rose and went to the hallway. Behind the coats and cobwebs, he opened the crate where they'd stored Sarah's things. Her worn boots, a ribbon, and a photograph in a cracked frame. His daughter, barely 12, clutching a shaggy pup with a lopsided ear and a patch of white across its chest. The same patch he saw now. The same eyes. He staggered back a step. No. The dog looked up then, almost as if it knew. It had been 7 years since Sarah fell through the ice. They never found her body, just the dog's tracks circling the hole and then vanishing. Silas never forgave himself for letting her go skating alone. He shut the world out after that, closed the ranch to visitors, turned his voice to stone. But now the dog had returned, and not alone. He looked back at the girl. She couldn't be more than 10, Lakota from the markings on her woven sash, her face too thin for her age. She murmured something in her sleep, words he didn't understand, but her hand reached blindly towards the dog, and the dog leaned in, licking her fingers like it was swearing loyalty. Silas sat down slowly, unable to shake the feeling that none of this was chance. That somehow the dog had carried Sarah's silence all these years and now brought him someone else to protect. The girl didn't know yet, but she'd walked into a place still haunted by love. He looked at the old photo again, then the dog, then the child. The storm outside was fading. Inside, a different kind of thaw had begun. Tomorrow he'd ride into town for medicine. But tonight he'd sit right here, beside the girl, the fire, and the dog that had come home from the dead. Morning light poured through the frost-laced window, painting the girl's face in gold. She stirred but didn't open her eyes, her hand still resting on the dog's back. Silas poured broth into a tin cup, knelt beside the cot, and tried again. "Can you drink?" Her lashes fluttered. She turned her face slightly, lips parting just enough to take a sip. He watched her throat move, watched life crawl back into her one careful swallow at a time. "You got a name?" he asked gently. She blinked but didn't answer. The dog pressed its snout into her ribs like it was trying to coax something out. Still nothing. Silas sighed and stood, placing the cup on the table. She was warming, that much was clear. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the tremble in her fingers had eased. But her silence sat heavy in the room. He left her in the warmth and stepped outside. The snow had softened, sun melting the edges into slush. The grave markers on the hill behind the barn leaned under white caps, Sarah's included. He hadn't visited in months, his boots crunched toward it. The dog had come from somewhere. Maybe it had returned here because of Sarah. Maybe it had followed the scent of something unspoken, some tether that time hadn't broken. He knelt by the wooden cross and whispered, "You sent her, didn't you?" No wind answered, just stillness. Back inside, the girl sat upright, staring at the fireplace like it held secrets. The dog sat beside her, unmoving, watching Silas. He brought a bowl of stew and offered it, and she took it without a word. "You're safe here," he said. "Whoever you're running from, they won't find you. Not if I can help it." Her eyes finally met his. Dark and glassy and old in a way a child's eyes shouldn't be. She tilted her head, studying him like she was measuring trust grain by grain. Then she reached into her sash and pulled out something wrapped in oilskin. She handed it to him. Inside was a folded piece of leather, cracked and weather-worn, with faded Lakota symbols burned into its surface. A name was etched across the top. Red Elk. Silas looked up sharply. "That was a bounty name, I remember it. Posters came through town 5 years ago. Said he was dangerous." The girl didn't flinch. She just stared at the leather, and then at the fire. That was the moment Silas knew. This girl wasn't just running from the cold. She was running from men who had marked her family for death. And somehow, by fate or something older, she'd ended up in his arms. Silas waited until the girl had drifted back to sleep before he went to the drawer beneath his old ledger. He hadn't opened it in years, not since he stopped caring about bounties and outlaws and all the noise of a world he no longer trusted. But the moment he saw the name Red Elk, something stirred. He rummaged past old bullets, rusted keys, and folded receipts until he found what he was looking for. A yellowing stack of wanted posters, corners curled from time and regret. There it was. Red Elk. $400 dead or alive. Accused of horse theft, rebellion, harboring fugitives. The sketch showed a man with hard eyes and braided hair, a face caught between rage and sorrow. Silas remembered when the posters came through. A bounty crew had ridden out east to track him. They never returned. A few months later, rumors spread that Red Elk had vanished into the Badlands with his daughter. A child. A girl about the age of the one sleeping under his roof. He folded the paper and returned it to the drawer, then sat in the chair near the fire, watching the girl breathe. If she was Red Elk's daughter, then she was worth more than gold to the wrong kind of men, and if the bounty was still active, someone would come looking. Maybe they already were. The dog stirred and came to sit by Silas's boots, resting its chin on his knee like it understood the weight of the moment. He reached down, fingers brushing its rough fur. "You carried her all this way, didn't you?" he whispered. "Kept her alive. Brought her straight to me." The dog's ear twitched, and for a fleeting second, Silas could almost believe it nodded. He stood, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The snow was melting fast, carving rivulets through the pasture. He followed the trail the dog had left, leading back to the frozen creek, to the hole they had dug together. Something else caught his eye nearby. Small footprints, deeper than the girl's, made by heavy boots. They led from the east and stopped not far from where she'd been buried. Then they turned back. Someone had been there, watching. Maybe they'd thought she was dead. Maybe they planned to return. Silas looked out toward the tree line, every instinct flaring to life. Whoever left those tracks wasn't finished, and now neither was he. He'd already buried one child. He'd not bury another. Not if breath still lived in his lungs and fire in his hands. Silas rode into town before sunrise, the girl still sleeping under thick quilts, the dog refusing to leave her side. He left a note by the stove and took his rifle. The trail into town was crusted in ice, but his mind ran hotter than the horse beneath him. If someone was tracking the girl, he needed answers. Now. He stopped at the trading post first. Jacob Holt ran the place, same as he had for 20 years. He was bent over crates of dried beans when Silas stepped in. "Well, look who the wind kicked up," Jacob muttered. "Didn't expect to see you again till next spring thaw." Silas walked straight to the counter. "Anyone come through asking about Lakota camps? Or kids?" Jacob blinked. "Number Y? Any bounty men?" "Not lately, but—" He hesitated, scratching his beard. "There was one fella, 2 nights ago. Didn't give a name. Quiet type. Looked military but rougher. Didn't buy anything. Just asked about old trails heading west." "What did he look like?" "Tall. Scar across his chin. Wore a coat that didn't match his boots. Had this way of looking through you, like you were already dead." Silas nodded grimly. That was a tracker's stare. Did he mention Red Elk? Jacob's face changed. "No. But I remember that name. Bounty years ago, right?" "Still worth money," Silas said. "And someone out there thinks the girl he left behind is still breathing." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Girl? You got one with you?" Silas didn't answer. He grabbed a tin of coffee, some dried meat, and a roll of gauze. "If anyone else comes through asking questions, you didn't see me. You didn't hear this." "You got it." But as Silas turned to go, Jacob said one last thing. "You always kept to yourself, Silas. Shut the world out after Sarah passed. But if you're sticking your neck out now, must be something worth saving." Silas paused at the door. "There is." Back on the trail, snow crunched under hoof as he scanned the tree line. Every shadow felt sharper now. By the time he reached the ranch, the dog met him at the gate, tail stiff, ears alert. Something had changed. Inside, the girl was awake, sitting up, eyes full of worry. She pointed to the window, then mimicked a man riding fast with a rifle. Silas's jaw tensed. Whoever left those footprints had come back, and this time they weren't planning to leave empty-handed. Silas barred the doors and stoked the fire high, eyes darting from the girl to the rifle leaning beside the window. The dog paced near the threshold, every muscle coiled. Outside, wind hissed through bare branches like a warning. The girl hadn't spoken a word, but her hand gestures were vivid. She'd seen a rider, maybe two, moving fast along the ridge. That meant time was short. He knelt beside her, laying a worn piece of charcoal and paper on the table. "Can you write?" She hesitated, then took the charcoal and slowly scrawled a name in crooked, shaky lines. Anka. Silas exhaled. "Anka, that your name?" She gave a small nod. Then she turned the paper over and wrote another word. Father. Beneath it, she began drawing, a triangle that became a mountain, a horse, a man with a feather, and then a flame. She pointed to the flame, then tapped her chest. Silas stared. They burned him. Her eyes glistened, lips trembling. Then she drew a circle of figures, men with guns, and crossed it out with thick black strokes. Bounty men. He didn't need more explanation. Red Elk had been caught, burned, and his daughter had survived, somehow escaped. And now they were coming to erase the last witness. Silas stood and pulled the rifle into his hands. "You're not alone anymore, Anka." The girl looked up at him, uncertain, but something in his tone seemed to settle the panic behind her eyes. The dog came to sit beside them, ears twitching toward the door. Sunset bled across the snow outside, orange fading into gray. They had maybe an hour before darkness. Maybe less. He walked to the barn, opened the back stall, and pulled out an old saddlebag packed with bullets and jerky, remnants from another life. He hadn't been a fighter since the war, hadn't aimed to kill in years. But tonight, he'd do whatever it took. For Sarah, for Anka, for whatever it meant to finally stop running from ghosts. As the sky darkened, Anka came to the window and tapped it softly. 2 riders, just shadows now, but drawing closer. Silas stepped behind her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "They won't take you." She didn't move, didn't speak. But she reached up slowly, took his hand in hers, and held it tight. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, hiding what was coming. But inside the cabin, everything was clear. A child had survived. And a man once hollow had found something worth standing for again. The first shot came just after midnight. A whisper through the trees, then a thud against the side of the barn. Silas had expected it. He was already crouched beneath the front window, rifle steady, eyes scanning the snowy horizon. Anka lay curled beside the hearth, wrapped in quilts, the dog standing guard at her side. When the second shot hit the fence post, he moved. Quick and silent, he slipped through the back door and into the dark. Snow muffled everything, footsteps, breath, even the snap of frozen brush beneath his boots. That was the danger and the gift. They were close. He circled around the barn, keeping low until he saw them. 2 figures on horseback, one holding a lantern, the other dismounting with a pistol drawn. Silas recognized the scar under the man's chin even in the dim light, the one Jacob had described. The man with mismatched boots and a bounty hunter's gait. Silas raised the rifle and waited. The lantern swung higher, casting shadows across the snow. "Ain't no sense in hiding," the man called. "We know she's here. Hand her over and we leave quiet. No need for blood." Silas didn't answer. He waited. Let the wind settle. Then he fired. The lantern exploded in a burst of flame and glass, and the horses shrieked. The scarred man dove to the ground, shouting curses, while the second rider spun his mount and galloped into the trees. Silas moved fast, flanking wide, coming up behind the fallen one. The man was fumbling for his pistol when Silas pressed the rifle to his temple. "Move again," he said coldly, "and you'll be part of the snow." The man froze. "It ain't worth this," he muttered. "She's just a kid." "Then why are you hunting her like an animal?" "Orders." "From who?" The man spat blood. Whoever's still paying, Red Elk's bounty never closed. Silas growled low. Red Elk's dead. You're hunting what's left of a story. And stories get people paid. Silas struck him hard with the rifle butt, knocking him out cold. He tied the man's hands with a rein and dragged him behind the barn. When he returned to the cabin, Anka was standing at the door, barefoot in the cold, the dog pressed tight against her leg. It's done for now, he told her. She didn't nod or smile. She simply walked up, reached into her coat, and pressed something into his hand. It was a piece of tanned leather, her father's pipe pouch, stitched with a new symbol. 2 hands clasped, bound by flame. Family. Chosen, not born. Silas swallowed hard. He understood. And he wasn't letting her go. By morning, the bound man was gone. Rope cut, blood on the snow, footprints vanishing into the woods. Silas stood over the spot with a hard jaw, rifle in hand, heart sinking. Whoever had freed him knew the land, moved light. Maybe it was the second rider. Maybe they had more coming. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. Back inside, Anka was kneeling by the fire, drawing symbols in ash with a twig. The dog lay beside her, tail thumping lightly as she worked. When Silas stepped in, she looked up and pointed to what she'd drawn. A sun rising over a curved hill, beneath it a long snake with open jaws. That a place? He asked. She nodded slowly, then tapped her chest. Then the fire. He knelt beside her. You want to go there? She picked up the twig again and added a line through the snake's body. Danger, he said aloud, more to himself than to her. But you think someone's still there? Anka reached into her pocket and pulled out a scrap of hide. On it, faded by time and soot, was a charcoal sketch of a woman's face. She handed it to him, her eyes steady. Your mother, he guessed. She didn't blink, just clutched the leather pouch tighter. Silas stared at the drawing. The woman looked strong, braided hair, sharp cheekbones, a softness around the eyes. Not someone who'd vanish easily. Maybe Anka's father hadn't died trying to escape. Maybe he died trying to lead them to her. And maybe someone had survived. We'd need supplies, he muttered. It's 2 days through hard timber, and if someone's still hunting you. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The girl stood and crossed the room. She went to the saddlebag, where he'd packed jerky and bullets, and began adding to it. Dried apples, a pouch of tea, a flint kit. She was ready. Silas watched her move, quiet but determined, then looked out the window toward the trees. The trail wouldn't be easy. If they left now, they could follow the old Lakota ridge trail before snow buried it again. But more than that, this wasn't just a journey to safety. It was a journey to answers, to the fire that started all of this. He walked over, slung the rifle across his shoulder, and took the pouch from her hands. Then we ride at dusk. The dog barked once, as if in agreement. Anka gave the faintest smile. And for the first time in years, Silas felt like he wasn't walking away from the past. He was walking into something worth finding. They rode at dusk, the sky dimming to copper behind them, hooves muffled by soft snow as they followed a narrow ridge trail only Anka seemed to know. She rode in front, the dog trotting beside her, Silas just behind, watching every shadow with his rifle close. The land here was old. Pine-choked valleys, cliffs etched by wind, silence that seemed to hold breath. They stopped only once to water the horses near a frozen stream, and that's when Silas saw it. Marks in the snow, too fresh to be theirs. Boot prints, heavy. One man. Same direction. The second rider was ahead of them. Anka spotted it too. Her face went pale, but she said nothing, just climbed back into the saddle and pressed forward. They reached the hollow by moonrise. A low dip in the pines, shielded from wind, smoke rising faintly from a rock-ringed pit. The remains of a fire, but long cold. Silas stepped down first, checked the perimeter. Whoever had been here was gone now, but not long ago. He found charred bark carved with Lakota symbols. Safe passage, buried memory, return later. He turned to Anka. She was standing by a tree stump, staring at something half buried in snow, a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Silas approached slowly and knelt to open it. Inside, dried meat, beads, a child's moccasins, and a folded letter written in 2 languages, Lakota and English. He read it aloud, voice low. "If you are reading this, it means the trail did not hold. Keep her safe. She knows the way. They will not rest until all voices are silent. But the fire still lives in her. In you." Silas swallowed. The signature at the bottom was smudged, but one word remained. "Elk." "It's from your mother," he said quietly. Anka crouched beside him, pressing her palm to the moccasins, her lips trembling. The dog leaned into her, nuzzling her shoulder. She wasn't crying, but her eyes burned like embers. Silas looked at the trail, winding further west. "If she's alive," he said, "she left this for you, for us." Anka looked up, and for the first time, she whispered one word. "Tomorrow." Silas smiled. It wasn't much, but it was the first word she'd spoken aloud. And in that moment, it carried the weight of all the silence she had survived. He nodded. "Tomorrow, then." They made camp beneath the pines, the fire small but steady, the stars wheeling above them like watchful spirits. And as the dog curled between them, Silas finally closed his eyes without fear. Not because danger had passed, but because he wasn't facing it alone. They reached the plateau at dawn, frost still clinging to the tall grass, the valley below blanketed in mist. Silas rode with his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the trees for movement. Anka sat straight in the saddle, her hands clenched tight on the reins, the dog leading just ahead, tail stiff, nose high. The trail ended at an outcropping of stone that looked over the canyon. For a moment, there was nothing. No smoke, no sound. Then Anka dismounted and walked to a narrow crevice between the rocks. She knelt, pressed her hand to the earth, and whispered something in Lakota. A breath later, the ground shifted. From behind the rocks, a woman stepped out, bow slung over one shoulder, knife in her belt. Her eyes locked on Anka, and her face crumpled like paper in fire. "Wichachula," she whispered. "Daughter." Anka ran to her, burying herself in the woman's arms, sobbing without sound. The dog barked and circled them, tail wagging madly. Silas sat frozen in the saddle. He'd braced for danger, for silence, for another grave. But not for this. The woman looked up at him as she held her daughter close. Her face was weathered, strong, but tears streamed down it freely. "You brought her home," she said. Silas dismounted slowly, unsure what to say. "She brought herself. I just followed." The woman placed a hand on his shoulder. "Red Elk was my husband. They hunted him like an animal. I thought they'd taken her too." "They tried," Silas said softly. "But that dog wouldn't let her go." She nodded. "That was his doing. That dog always had more spirit than a dozen men." Anka turned, reached into her coat, and held out the leather pouch, the one with the new symbol. Her mother took it in shaking hands and let out a low cry, clutching it to her chest. "You kept the fire," she whispered. "You carried it." They stayed on the plateau that night, safe beneath the watchful cliffs. The second rider never came. Maybe he turned back. Maybe he saw the firelight from above and understood what he was up against. Not just a girl and a rancher, but something older. Something enduring. Before dawn, Silas stood at the ridge and looked east. He knew he couldn't stay. His work was done here. But as he turned to go, Anka ran up and placed something in his hand. Sarah's old ribbon, once wrapped around the dog's neck. "You saved us both," she said. Just 5 words. But they undid him. He nodded once, gruffly, and walked down the trail. The snow had started to melt. And so had he.